Midterm votes matter.
Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Good Trouble Voting Rights Podcast, sponsored by Black Women for Positive Change, featuring host Dr. Georgia Dunston and co-host Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds. Ladies, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third in our Black Women for Positive Change 2022 10-part Good Trouble podcast series, where we come together every second and fourth Wednesday of the month to talk about hot topics on why midterm votes matter, where HOT, H-O-T, stands for Healing Our Thinking. Today we are extremely delighted, or shall I say, divinely blessed, to have with us three esteemed members of the clergy to speak on why midterm votes matter from the perspective and mind of the faith community. I am Dr. Georgia M. Dunston, chair of the Black Women for Positive Change Science Committee, co-chair of our Voters' Rights Subcommittee, and host of this Black Women for Positive Change 2022 Good Trouble Voting and Voters' Rights podcast. I'm joined today by our co-host, our own good Reverend Dr. Barbara A. Reynolds, Chaplain of Black Women for Positive Change. In addition to being a minister of the faith community, Dr. Reynolds is an award-winning civil rights activist journalist and author of many books, including the Coretta Scott King biography. With her are our two guest speakers, Reverend William H. Lamar IV, senior pastor of the historic Metropolitan A.M.E. Church in Washington, D.C. It's noteworthy that Reverend Lamar recently took the infamous Proud Boys to court for vandalizing his church's property. We also have joining us Black Women for Positive Change good brother, Reverend Oliver E. Bowie, who is chair of our development committee. Reverend Bowie is pastor of Abundant Living Family Fellowship in Los Angeles, California. Let me turn the microphone over now to our co-host, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds, to lead our panel today on why midterm votes matter to and from the perspective of the faith community. Dr. Reynolds.
Dr. Dunston, thank you for that introduction. And we're going to jump right in here because these are hot topics. I can't think of a time in recent history when the midterm elections were so strategic to the survival of Black and brown people as this one. All 435 members of the House are up for election, as well as 35 of the 100 Senate seats that could change the history of our country. There are so many topics, as you were elaborating, voting on the issues of Roe v. Wade, the right for women to make decisions about our own bodies, voter suppression, whether police shootings, killing unarmed Black men will be investigated, plus whether assault rifles will be tolerated, and even more important, the ground will be laid for a return of twice impeached white supremacist Donald Trump to the White House in November. My question is, do you think the seriousness of all of this is reaching down to the Black and brown voters who have the most to lose? Are they fired up to vote? I'll ask that first to Pastor Lamar, and then to Reverend Bowie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reynolds, and thank you all for this opportunity to share. First of all, I want to say the condition for Indigenous people, Black people, and others in the American empire has always been an existential crisis from moment to moment. We know that the violent, conquering spirit that took land, that stole bodies for labor, is the founding spirit of this nation. And we know that when the founders of this nation, those who are called founding fathers, I don't consider them to be my or our founders, but when they wrote of democracy, they excluded everyone but propertied white men. Only propertied white men could vote. We need to understand that is the DNA of the American experiment, that only the wealthy and connected believe that they, by divine right and by their wealth and breeding and where they were born, many of them to the manor born, many of them to the plantation or to the armed labor camp born, they wanted to make decisions within that small cadre. We need to understand that even, as I stated, poor white people were not considered worthy of voting. So America has fought and fought and fought, and by that I mean we have fought and fought and fought to expand their white supremacist restricted definition of democracy. And my parents, I will be 48 on Friday. My parents were both born in 1950. They lived in a nation where they could not vote. So the United States, in my lifetime, only one generation away from apartheid. Let's be clear that America has never been committed to democracy. And right now, what we see happening in southern states, what we see happening across the nation, what we see happening in the Supreme Court and the legislature is not anomalous. It is what it means to be American. So Black people have always known this. We need to remind ourselves of this. And yes, not every church, not every mosque, not every synagogue is telling this story, but we are sharing that if we do not participate in these voting, in the opportunity to vote, it will indeed become worse. Voting will not save us, but it is one step toward making this nation what it ought to be. And yes, the word is getting out. Yes, we're serious about it because we need to be clear. You stated this, Dr. Reynolds. This is an existential crisis. There are those who would rather we be politically weak and or dead than to flourish in this space. And I'm beyond euphemism. I got no time to pretend like we live in a democracy when we don't. I got no time to pretend like people are Christians when they're not. This is about life and death. Thank you.
I want to talk about the role of Black pastors. I watch TBN consistently, and I see the ministers there consistently attacking Black preachers, attacking the causes that we care about. And then when I listen to hear what Black pastors are doing, it seems from at least watching social media and watching TV that our Black churches are missing in action. It seems like the white pastors are coming against us with a sword and we are responding back with a feather. Can you speak to this situation where there are complaints that our Black churches are not really speaking and encouraging even voting rights as they should?
Let me be very clear. Our stories are told best by ourselves. We are best equipped. If you are looking for white-controlled, corporate-controlled media to tell our stories, you will not find them there. So let me give you an example, because we're talking about Black women for positive change. It could be the one Black woman who set us on a trajectory to deal specifically with American political violence and economic violence is the great ancestor Mamie Till Mobley, who decided that she would keep her beautiful son Emmett's casket open so the world could see what American violence is all about. Now, I raise that because it was not the New York Times or the Washington Post that covered that. It was Ebony and Jet, local Black-owned papers. We tell our stories best. And there is a lot of scholarship right now about Black newspapers who told stories when we were looking for our loved ones during the period of enslavement and Reconstruction, those who had escaped, those who had had difficulty, those who had been sold away. The Black press consistently tells the story of how Black churches are on the ground, about how we are organizing get out the vote efforts, about how we're having candidate forums, about how we're organizing to leverage our political power. But, and Dr. Reynolds, I'll say this, you're better than me because I cannot watch TBN. I don't call it Trinity Broadcasting. It is the Beelzebub Network. It is, but I appreciate you watching because it lets you know what the enemies of God are about. We got to be clear. Just because people talking about Jesus and God does not mean that they are for the gospel and for human flourishing. There are plenty of Black preachers, unfortunately, who are white evangelicals and blackface, who have the exact same agenda as Jerry Falwell Sr., Jerry Falwell Jr., as so many others in that TBN ecclesial environment. And so I just have to be honest. You all ask me here, you know how I roll. As my grandmother would say, everybody your color, ain't your kind, right? And
Right.
all your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. So there are some Black clergy who are not for the flourishing of Black people, nor for the flourishing of all human beings. But there are many of us, women, men, and others who are on the ground making it happen. And we have to tell this story ourselves because those who are interested in the status quo, the New York Times, you can find some great stuff there, but they're interested in the status quo from the left. The Wall Street Journal, sometimes you can find something worth reading in there. They're interested in the status quo from the right. We are not interested in the status quo. We're interested in the fundamental reordering of the American empire's politics and economics in the interest of human flourishing. And as many have said, what you do for Black women, if it is fair for Black women, it is fair for us all. And so I'm just appreciative for the question, but you can't look to certain people to tell our story. We got to tell it ourselves.
Well, we also have to find a way to touch the masses of people. Are there other ways? In fact, I know Black Women for Positive Change has been pushing votercades where we can have the sort of motorcade kind of thing going from community to community to stir up action. Are there creative ways that you can think of that would mobilize more Black and brown voters? Something for example, souls to the polls. Is that still going on?
Well, that's a great question. And let me share this, Reverend Dr. Reynolds. So I cannot remember the scholar, but people can Google this, about the multiplier effect of Black women and their votes. So let's be clear. If it were not for Black women, Joe Biden would be eating ice cream in Delaware. He would not be the president of the United States. He was drowning and dying politically. And Jim Clyburn, who is an establishment Democrat, Jim Clyburn rallied together to get support for Biden in South Carolina. He would have lost were it not for the fact, and how Clyburn did it, he rallied Black women in South Carolina. Black women saved Biden's behind. And what the scholars have shared is that Black women in South Carolina who called their children, their grandchildren, their nieces, their nephews, their godchildren, community members, I can't remember the exact number, and so I'll leave the scholarship to you all, but I believe it was every Black woman multiplied her vote by 5 or 6 times.
Amazing.
And let me share this and I'll stop. You will not get people to vote without organizing. And organizing is based on relationships. You can send all the emails you want. That's not going to get people to vote. You can make telephone calls. That might be a little more effective. But the way it works, and I've seen this because we organize effectively at Metropolitan and in Washington, you call people with whom you have relationships and you say to them, will you go to the polls? Will you go vote? When Black women do that, we move. That is why Biden is the president. Do not forget that. Black women in South Carolina saved his tail. And that's the only way that it works. It is organizing and relationships. And we need not let Biden, who is 5 blocks from where I sit right now, we appreciate Justice Ketanji, but that ain't all. We want more because you would not be there were it not for us, period.
I got to bring back Pastor Bowie here, and Pastor Bowie, you can jump in anywhere you want to. We were talking about the seriousness of the midterm election reaching the Black and brown voters who have the most to lose, and even I even raised the question of what I think is the silence of Black pastors. When you look at how many of the white pastors are really beating the drum, telling folks to vote, creating issues of fear, all of these things, but I don't hear that much from the other side. So it's a lot. You can jump in anywhere that you wish.
Number one, let me make this statement, at least where I sit. If it was not for the faith leaders and the church, our Black vote would not matter at all. Every church that I've served and the Black pastors that ministers that I am connected to, and I'm connected to quite a few of them, not just in Los Angeles, but throughout the nation, we have made this priority number one. So it is a myth that the Black pastors or the Black church is not concerned, is not involved. Now, what we have to understand, and those of you, if you've listened to conservative radio and you're familiar with the name James Dobson, who played a major role of building an army of white evangelical pastors who are well funded, well supported, well organized, well connected, and relational, build strong relationships that has a machine that moves forward that we are up against. So who also get the exposure and the coverage because they have Fox News, which intentionally supports their efforts and continues, whether they're right or wrong, will stand with them. Now, what's happening now, and I appreciate, and Pastor Lamar, I applaud you and thank you for your leadership and recognizing the power of the Black woman. The power of the Black woman, yes.
You have given me the cue to bring a powerful Black woman into this discussion. Dr. Dunston, you have a question?
I was certainly listening closely to Reverend Lamar and Bowie, but I do want to ask the question. We often refer to our faith community, but we have three words that often go with this community: faith, hope, and love. And so as our clergy representatives, I would ask our speakers to please broaden the community to include the role of hope and love in midterm votes matter. Yes, Reverend Lamar.
Beautiful. What a wonderful question. And you are channeling the words of the apostle about faith, hope, and love abiding, these three, but the greatest is love. And let's start with love. I want to lift up Martin King's read of love. And there is a book that talks about the mothers of Martin King, James Baldwin, and Malcolm X, saying that we only know about these three great men because of their mothers and what their mothers taught them. So Martin King's understanding of love was demonstrated by his extremely wise mother, Alberta. And this love is not an anemic, emotional love. So in America, the language of love is very poor. In the biblical Greek, there are many more terms that have a more fulsome way of describing love. Because we might say we love a car, we love food, and we love our spouse and children. Well, that already lets you know that this is an inadequate term. And so for us, when we talk about love as a thin emotional attachment, that's not sufficient. Love is dense. Love is fiery. Love is revolutionary. Love considers the needs of others before it considers the need of the individual. And so the way that love ties to voting is, unless my vote is one that values the needs of all human beings, more than my own economic resources. So let's just talk about the evil of the United States tax code. If you earn money from dividends, you pay less in taxes than those who are wage earners. Now, dividend earners are wealthy. Wage earners, by and large, are not. We have a tax system that is fundamentally evil because it extracts more from the poor than it does from the wealthy. Love says, I vote and I overturn that. Love says my vote means universal health care. Love says my vote means the end of the prison industrial complex. And when you talk about hope, I'll say this and I'll stop. There's a fundamental difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is anthropologically grounded in what humans do. Hope is theologically grounded in the unfolding work of God in the world. I am not optimistic. American history gives me no reason to be optimistic, but I am hopeful. I am hopeful that if we will follow the God who made Mary sing the song called the Magnificat in the first chapter of Luke, that God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty, that our God is a God who right now is fighting in love to overturn the systems that are destroying us. But most of us are too churchy, too afraid, too imbued in white evangelicalism to follow God in the fight that Jesus exemplified when he turned over tables of oppression in the temple. That is my hope, that we will follow the God who turns over tables, who fills the poor with good things, the hungry with good things, and sends away the exploitative, rich, extractive capitalists, sends them away with nothing. That's our God.
Just the last question here. I want to just ask both of you, when you talk to your congregants and when you talk to the many thousands of people that you influence, what do they say the important issues that they need answered? And is politics the answer, or should there be something more?
Let me just say very briefly that our congregation is interested in policies that ensure that all human beings flourish, that rip us away from the lie of scarcity toward the divine truth of abundance. There is more than enough in the world for us all. We must first divorce ourselves from the lie that there is not enough. There is more than enough. There are people who, because of the nation in which we live, hoard more than God intends for them to have. The prayer the Lord taught us says, give us this day our daily bread, not give me 85,000 freezers so I can store all the bread I need while other people grow hungry, right? And so our people are looking for policy solutions. Now, Dr. Reynolds, great question. Politics will not solve it all, but politics moves us provisionally toward a more equitable distribution of God's resources so that all of God's children can flourish. So we understand the limits of political engagement, but we also understand that if we do not engage, we are bringing unto ourselves death. And so there is work for us to do.
Well, I do have to get this question in because it gives me nightmares just thinking about it, and that's domestic terrorism. We look at how our capital was just torn up apart. 5 policemen killed in this melee, this insurrection, and we can see the Proud Boys, many of them still walking around. And I think about the fact that if the Justice Department is come back to Trump, our shootings of Black men, our just overall mob rule will be the law of the land. So do you think that this is an issue that is been given attention? And what do you think we should be doing about it? Because people do not feel safe in America because not from what could happen from without, but from the domestic terrorism within.
Excellent. And let me just say this briefly. Ida B. Wells is the ancestor to whom we should look. She wrote about domestic terrorism in the United States. Terrorism against our mothers and our fathers who were thriving economically. Terrorism against those of us who had done all that we could to be good members of this community, lynched, burned, raped. Domestic terrorism in America is beyond this January 6th reality. They are simply ignorant children of violent parents who have used violence, domestic violence. They bombed churches and killed little girls about the same age as my mother. They cut off testicles of Black men. They ripped fetuses out of the womb of Black women to frighten us. And they killed Emmett Till, and his mother refused to let that image die. Domestic terrorism is a part of the politics of the United States to keep certain people from exercising their tenuous citizenship rights. And let me say this, when Trump was elected, he gutted any of the resources of the federal government being used, listen, to examine and investigate white supremacist violent movements. Why? Because they were key to his political success. Let me say this and I will stop. Do not fool yourselves. They are willing and will unleash violence as a political tactic. They will use death as they have in the past to control us. And if Black people are not willing to have that discussion, we are setting up our grandchildren for their own deaths. We need to be clear about who these people are and what they will do.
Our question was, Pastor Bowie, about domestic terrorism. Do you think that enough attention is being paid to that? And what do you think we should be thinking and doing about that, which is the greatest threat, not from foreign leaders, but from leaders, Proud Boys and others right here in the United States? Any thoughts there as we close?
Okay, number one, let me tell you, domestic terrorism is part of the fabric of this nation. Domestic terrorism has been imposed upon us since we came to this nation, and especially imposed upon the African American male. So what we have to understand, we can't look at this from our perspective, but one, be able to look at it from a historical perspective and look at it from the white supremacist perspective. And as far as they're concerned, domestic, give me the word again. I haven't seen
Terrorism.
Domestic terrorism is normal and lawful according to them. We have unfortunately been naive enough and foolish enough to believe that these people love us and care for us, and that these words that they have in mind for us, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that was not written for us, as Pastor Lamar had pointed out. We must understand that unless we take control of our own destiny and begin to assume the responsibility and unite with one another, and most of all, return back to our God, who has brought us to where we are today, and put our trust in him and begin to move forward and combat this, not simply through a political means or simply between a natural means, but what we have to do is fight this most through spiritual means, for we are in extreme spiritual warfare. And domestic violence is one of their number one tools, as they use it against us, even for slavery, for lynching, and even now and the discrimination and racism that has been a part of the fabric of this nation since its beginning. And if you don't believe that, we need to also go study what they've done to the Native Americans, that they wouldn't even have survived if they didn't help them. So we better wake up.
Well, I just want to say, as we come to a close, voices, brilliant voices, voices of passion, voices of excitement, voices that inspire. I mean, we have certainly been blessed with these kinds of voices right here on our broadcast. And not only voices, but the voices we heard are men of activism, to not only speak, but to act. So I want to thank everyone who was involved on this show. I want to thank my co host, Dr. Georgia Dunston, who I wish I could say more about her because she's a well known, nationally beloved and respected scientist, but also a voter registration voter activist. I want to thank Dr. Stephanie Myers, our spiritual and leader. Of course, I call her spiritual leader because she has the spirit of all of us working together. And the brilliance of Dr. William Lamar and Dr. Reverend Oliver Bowie. I think you have inspired us. You have made us want to continue, as they say, one more time. So thank you for listening. And we're not running out of time, but we're not running out of action. So thank you, and keep tuned because we shall be back.
Well, I would add that this conversation has been recorded and will be available. So I want to encourage everyone to go to the Black Women for Positive Change.org, spelled out BLACK WOMENFORPOSITIVECHANGE.org. And you will be able to get this conversation because this is the communication that we need to be listening to in our community to counter your opening comment, Dr. Reynolds. So I want to again thank our panelists today for a most provocative conversation, and let this be the beginning of what our community is listening to, really broadening the base of the faith community. I really appreciate you bringing in hope and love because, as Dr. Bowie, as you said, this is a spiritual warfare. So as we close, we know that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. That means that we're not knowledgeable of carnal, but the weapons of our warfare that we are assured of. And it is our faith community who brings that message to our conversation. So let voter rights be our new galvanizing civil rights issue for our community. Thank you.
Well done, Pastor Dunston.
Midterm votes matter.